My daughter and her husband changed the locks on our own front door while we stood on the porch in the cold. She looked at me through the glass and said, "This belongs to us now. You should have thought about that sooner." I stood there, shaking, holding my husband Raymond's arm. Then he leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Calm down, Miriam. They have no idea what I buried in the backyard." Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back to Auntie's Stories. Before I begin, I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel and drop a comment, telling me which state or country you are listening from. It truly warms my heart to know how far these stories travel. Now settle in and enjoy. This house was built one nail at a time. I know that because I watched every single one go in. Raymond and I cleared this land ourselves, 38 years ago, with our own hands and a borrowed tractor that broke down twice. We planted the oak trees that now shade the front porch. We poured the concrete path that leads from the gate to the front door. Every crack in that path, every loose step on the back porch, every window that sticks a little in the rainy season. I know them the way I know the lines on my own palms. Raymond's mother, Miss Eunice, a woman who never raised her voice but never backed down from anything, used to say that a home is not just walls and a roof. She said it is the living proof that you showed up, that you stayed, that you built something worth keeping. I thought about Miss Eunice that morning as I stood at the stove stirring a pot of grits. I always cook grits on cold mornings. Raymond says the smell alone is enough to make him feel better, no matter what kind of night he had. He has not been well these past 2 years. His knees give him trouble, and some mornings he moves so slowly it takes him 20 minutes just to come from the bedroom to the kitchen table. But when the grits are ready, he comes. He always comes. I was slicing a ripe tomato to go alongside when I heard footsteps on the stairs, the quick, confident kind that belonged to my daughter Yolanda, not the slow, careful steps of a man managing pain. I knew, before she opened her mouth, that she was not coming to say good morning. She stood in the doorway in her exercise clothes, phone in one hand, coffee mug in the other, looking at the stove like I had done something wrong just by being there. "Mama," she said, "you left the porch light on again all night. That runs up the electric bill." I didn't say anything. I kept slicing the tomato. "We're not running a hotel here." She walked past me, opened the refrigerator, and began moving things around inside it, looking for something. I noticed she had rearranged the shelves again. My yogurt and Raymond's medication were pushed to the very back. Her things, her fancy green juices, and her husband Darnell's meal prep containers, filled the front. They had been living with us for 2 years, ever since Darnell lost his business and they could no longer keep up with their mortgage. I did not hesitate. They are my daughter and my son-in-law. Family helps family. That is what Raymond and I were always taught and what we always believed. We gave them the large bedroom upstairs, the one with the ensuite bathroom and the balcony that looks over the garden. Raymond and I moved into the smaller room at the back, the one that gets less morning light. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was temporary. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when nobody wants to talk about it. Darnell started working from our living room, taking over the large table where we used to eat Sunday dinners as a family. His papers and computer equipment spread out until there was no space for anything else. Yolanda hired a cleaning service, which was kind, except she told them which rooms to clean and which to skip, and somehow our room was always skipped. Small things. I told myself they were small things. But small things have weight when they pile up. I was still at the stove when Raymond appeared at the kitchen door. He moved slowly that morning, leaning on the doorframe. His face was tired, but his eyes were sharp, the way they always are first thing in the morning before the pain settles into his joints. He looked at Yolanda, then at me. I shook my head very slightly. A 40-year marriage teaches you to talk without words. He understood. He sat down at the table and I put his grits in front of him. He reached out and put his hand over mine for just a moment. That was all. That was enough. Yolanda watched us with that look she had been giving us lately. The look of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the right moment to announce it. I had seen that look grow stronger over the past few weeks. I heard her talking on the phone behind closed doors. I heard the words attorney and deed and estate planning. I am not a foolish woman. I spent 30 years as a bookkeeper. I know numbers and I know what people mean when they say one thing and are thinking another. That afternoon, while Raymond was resting, Yolanda sat down across from me at the kitchen table. Darnell stood behind her with his arms crossed. They looked rehearsed, the way people look when they have been practicing what they are going to say. "Mama," she began, "we need to have a serious conversation." I folded my hands on the table. "I am listening," I said. "You know how much Darnell and I care about you and Daddy. We worry. With Daddy's health the way it is, and everything being so complicated these days legally, we think it would make everything simpler if you and Daddy sign the house over to me. Just a transfer. Keep it in the family." Darnell nodded. "It protects everyone. Avoids probate. Makes things easier down the road." I looked at my daughter. This girl I had rocked to sleep, walked to school, sat with through fevers in the night. She was looking at me with the calm face of a person making a business proposal, not the face of a child speaking to her mother. My chest went cold. But my voice did not shake. "No," I said. "This house belongs to your father and to me. That is not something I am willing to change." Yolanda blinked. She had not expected that word. She expected hesitation, questions, maybe gentle pushback she could talk me out of. She did not expect a flat, quiet no. Darnell uncrossed his arms. He stepped forward. "Miss Miriam, we are not trying to take anything from you. We are trying to make sure you're protected." I looked at him. Darnell is a smooth talker. He always has been. I knew that about him the first time Yolanda brought him home. He has a smile that arrives before the rest of him and a way of making every bad idea sound like it was your idea. "You want to protect us," I said calmly. "Then stay here and help care for Raymond. That is what family does. I do not need my name removed from my own home." Yolanda's jaw tightened. She looked at Darnell. Something passed between them. "Mama," she said carefully, "you are not thinking clearly about what happens if Daddy passes first. I understand that was hard to hear. But these are real questions. Real questions about real property. That a real attorney needs to handle properly." That is when Raymond's voice came from the hallway. We all turned. He was standing there, one hand on the wall, his face white with anger and something deeper than anger. I had not heard him come down the hall. He looked at Yolanda for a long time without speaking. When he did speak, his voice was low and each word was separate and deliberate. "My name," he said, "is on that deed. And I am still in my right mind." Yolanda flinched. She started to say something. He raised one hand to stop her. He turned and went back down the hallway. I heard his door close. Yolanda pushed back her chair. Her face had gone hard. "Fine," she said. "We will talk about this again. But you need to understand that we are not going anywhere. This is our home too." She said that last part looking straight at me, and then she and Darnell left the room. That night they went out and did not come back until late. I sat with Raymond until he fell asleep. I thought about Yolanda as a little girl, how she used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. How she used to save part of her Halloween candy to share with Raymond because she knew he liked the peanut butter ones. When did that girl disappear? I did not know the answer. I just sat in the dark and held my husband's hand. The next morning, they acted as though the conversation had never happened. Yolanda made coffee. Darnell made a joke at breakfast. And everything seemed normal on the surface. But I could feel what was underneath it. Plan. A decision already made. I recognized the shape of it even if I could not see the details. I went to check on Raymond around mid-morning. He was sitting up in bed, more alert than usual. He patted the space beside him on the mattress and I sat down. He looked at me with those steady brown eyes that I fell in love with when we were 23 years old. "Miriam," he said, "I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." He reached under his pillow and pulled out an old folded piece of paper, soft from years of being handled, and held it out to me. Took it. My hands were not quite steady now. I opened the clasp. Inside, wrapped in a piece of old cloth, were several envelopes, a small brass key, and a folded document that looked official. Raymond sat beside me. "Open the big envelope first," he said. I did. Inside was a document. Read it, he said. I unfolded the paper slowly. It was a hand-drawn map. A simple one, done in pencil on plain paper. It showed our backyard. The oak tree near the back fence, the raised vegetable bed, the old water spigot. And marked with a small careful X, a spot between the oak tree and the fence, labeled simply with the words in Raymond's handwriting. For the real day. I looked up at him. He was watching me carefully, measuring my reaction. What is this, Raymond? I asked. He exhaled. He said, when my father died and left us this land, there were some things that came with it that I never showed anyone. My father told me to keep them safe and only use them if everything else failed. He said there would be a day when I would know. I stared at the map. I stared at my husband. We have been married 40 years, I said. He nodded. No. He reached out and took my hand. No, I should have told you sooner. But I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant. Afraid of what it would change. And then the years went by. I held the map in my lap. Outside the window, I could hear Yolanda's voice on the phone, walking back and forth on the back patio. Raymond said, last night I lay here and I listened to what she said to me in that hallway and I thought, this is the day. This is exactly the day my father meant. I looked at the map again. The X between the oak tree and the fence. That night after Yolanda and Darnell went upstairs, I helped Raymond out through the back door. It was cold and the ground was soft from the rain 2 days before. Raymond carried the small flashlight and I carried the old garden spade from the shed. We moved slowly, taking our time. We did not speak. The oak tree was easy to find in the dark. I counted the steps to the X on the map. I pressed the blade of the spade into the earth. The ground gave way more easily than I expected. 3 inches down, the metal clinked against something hard. I knelt and scraped the earth away with my fingers until I felt the top of a tin box. A flat one with a lid that had a simple clasp. I lifted it free. It was heavier than it looked. Raymond held the flashlight while I carried the box to the small iron bench near the back steps. I sat down. My hands were not quite steady now. I opened the clasp. Inside, wrapped in a piece of old cloth, were several envelopes, a small brass key, and a folded document that looked official. Raymond sat beside me. Open the big envelope first, he said. I did. Inside was a document. On thick paper with a notary seal. I brought it close to the flashlight. It was a deed. Not the deed to our house. A deed to a piece of land across town, a large plot on the east side of the county, recorded in the name of Raymond's father, Mr. Henry Dowell, dated over 50 years ago. I read it twice. Raymond, I said quietly. He nodded. My father bought that land before anyone wanted it. He paid cash. He never built on it and he never sold it. I looked at the document. I looked at my husband. What is it worth now? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Darnell's company, he said, spent 3 years trying to buy that land for a development project before it went under. He could not get it. The owners would not sell. I felt the words land on me one at a time. Darnell knew about this land. No, Raymond said. He does not know my father owned it. Nobody does. It was never recorded in my name because my father said leave it quiet. Said one day the family would need something nobody could touch. I held the deed in my lap. Cold air was moving through the oak leaves above us. I thought about Raymond's father, a quiet man who only came to visit us 3 or 4 times in the years I knew him, who always brought pound cake and always sat in the same chair by the front window and never said much. I thought about how a quiet man can carry something heavy for a very long time and never let you see the weight of it. I thought about how Raymond had carried it too, alone, all these years. Something was moving inside me, but I kept it still. We went back inside and I made tea and we sat at the kitchen table until after midnight, going through the rest of the box. There were 2 more letters, one from Raymond's father explaining everything about the land, the taxes he had paid each year, the bank account he had set up to continue paying them, and the instructions for what to do with the deed. The other letter was shorter. It was addressed to Raymond. It said, "Son, this is for the hardest day. I hope you never need it. But if you do, use it without shame. Your grandfather worked for that land with nothing but his 2 hands and his good name. It belongs to the family. Protect it. We sat in silence after I finished reading. Raymond looked older in the kitchen light, and also somehow more like himself than he had in months. I said, "Why did you not use this before, when they first started making things hard for us?" He said, "Because I kept hoping it would not come to that. I kept hoping she would come back to herself." I said nothing to that. I just folded the letters carefully and placed them back in the box. Put the box in the back of the closet in our room, behind my winter coats, and I lay awake for a long time after Raymond fell asleep. My mind was not racing. It was working slowly and clearly, the way it works when I am going through the books at the end of the year, when I need every number to be exactly right. I am a bookkeeper. I understand assets. I understand what things are worth and what happens when the right person holds the right paper at the right time. By the time morning came, I had a plan. In the days that followed, I moved through the house the way I always did. I cooked, cleaned. I kept Raymond comfortable. I said good morning and good night. Yolanda and Darnell noticed nothing different. Why would they? To them I was the same Miriam I had always been. Patient, predictable, easy to overlook. They stopped lowering their voices around me. They had decided I was not a threat. Darnell was on the phone one afternoon in the living room talking to someone about timelines and paperwork. I walked through carrying laundry and he did not even pause. He said into the phone, "The old lady is not going to be a problem. We are handling it." Kept walking. I went into the back room. I set the laundry down on the bed. I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. I felt no explosion of anger, no flood of tears. Just that same cold, clear feeling I had had since the night at the oak tree. A feeling like standing in a very still room and seeing exactly where everything is. Darnell said I was not going to be a problem. He was right about one thing. I was not going to be a problem. I was going to be something much worse. For him. The next morning, I told Yolanda I had a doctor's appointment and asked Darnell if he would drive me, since my car was in the shop. He said yes without looking up from his laptop. We drove mostly in silence. I directed him to a building on the far side of town. When he pulled up, I saw him register the sign. It was a law office. He turned to look at me. I said, "I will only be an hour. You can wait or come back." His face was controlled, but I saw something shift behind his eyes. He said, "What kind of appointment is this?" I said, "The kind a person should have made a long time ago." I got out of the car and walked inside, and I did not look back. The attorney's name was Calvin Marsh. He had been Raymond's father's attorney and then Raymond's attorney, and he was ours now, though I had not needed to use him in years. He was a compact, careful man with reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and the habit of writing everything down in a small notebook before he typed anything. I sat down across from him and I told him everything. He spoke for nearly an hour. He listened. He wrote. He asked 2 questions. When I was done, he took off his glasses and set them on the desk and looked at me. He said, "Do you have the deed?" I placed it on his desk. He looked at it for a long time. He said, "You know what this land is worth today?" I said I had an idea, but I wanted to hear it from him. He told me a number. I did not react. I just nodded. He said, "And you are sure about all of this?" I said I was. He said, "Then let's get to work." I went home and I was quiet and ordinary for 11 more days. 11 days of cooking grits and doing laundry and saying good morning. 11 days of Yolanda looking at me like I was something temporary that would eventually sort itself out. 11 days of Darnell spreading his papers across our dining room table and talking about timelines on the phone. I did not rush. There is a particular patience that comes to a woman when she has been a bookkeeper for 30 years. You learn that the numbers will add up. You just have to wait until the end of the column. The end of the 11th day, I got a call from Calvin Marsh. He spoke for 4 minutes. I said 3 words. "Thank you, Calvin." Then I put the phone down and went to sit with Raymond. He was watching the evening news. I sat in the chair beside his bed and I told him everything. He listened with his eyes half closed, and when I was done he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "My father always said you were the one, Miriam." I asked him what he meant. He said, "The one who would know what to do with it." I reached over and turned off the bedside lamp, and we sat in the dark for a little while, and I thought about what it means to be trusted with something for a very long time by someone who is no longer here. The next morning at breakfast, I waited until Yolanda and Darnell were both seated. I put plates in front of them and sat down across from them. I said, "I have something to tell you." Yolanda looked up with that patient, slightly condescending face she had been using with me for 2 years. Darnell kept eating. I said, "I met with our attorney last week." Darnell put down his fork. I said, "I have been going through the family's property holdings in preparation for Raymond's estate planning." Yolanda straightened. I said, "I wanted you to know that Raymond's father left a piece of land on the east side of the county in this family's name. Land that has been held quietly for 50 years and has never been sold." Darnell went very still. I said the address. I watched his face. For just a moment, the careful, easy expression he always wore came completely apart. It was only a second. Then it was back. But I had seen it. Yolanda looked at Darnell. Something moved between them. She looked back at me. "Mama," she said carefully, "what are you saying?" I said, "I am saying that the estate is larger than you thought, and that our attorney is handling all of it, including the house and the land, according to Raymond's wishes and mine." Darnell said very quietly, "That land. Where did you hear about that land?" I said, "From Raymond's father. In writing." Darnell stood up. He walked out of the kitchen. I heard him go upstairs. Yolanda sat across from me. And for the first time in a long time she looked like a girl and not like a businesswoman. She said, "Mama, I did not know about any land." Said, "I know. But your husband did." She looked toward the stairs. She looked back at me. I could see something working in her face. Something that had been locked away for a while was trying to get out. I did not push it. I just stood up and took the plates to the sink. 3 days passed. Darnell was quiet in a way he had never been quiet before. The way a person is quiet when they are calculating and coming up empty. Yolanda walked around the house with a look on her face like someone trying to remember the words to something. She did not come to me. Not yet. On the 4th day, a letter arrived. It was from Calvin Marsh's office, addressed to Darnell Okafor. I was the one who brought in the mail. I set it on the kitchen table beside his coffee cup and went back to the stove. I heard him come down, heard the paper tear, heard nothing for a long time. Then I heard him say, in a voice that was trying to be calm and not quite making it, "What is this?" I turned around. He was holding the letter with both hands. His face had changed. All the smooth confidence was gone. "What is this, Miriam?" He used my first name. He had always called me Miss Miriam before. The shift did not escape me. I said, "That is a letter from our attorney informing you that as of last week, a formal property inventory has been registered with the county on behalf of Raymond and myself, and that all existing and future claims against any of those properties will require legal review." He stared at me. He said, "You can't do this. This is not about the land. You know this is not about the land." I said, "Darnell, it is about all of it. Everything. The house and the land and what you said on the phone about the old lady not being a problem." His jaw tightened. He took a breath. He said, "I'm going to call my attorney." I said, "That is your right." He walked out. I heard the back door slam. I turned back to the stove. My hands were steady. Outside I could hear the oak tree moving in the wind. 2 more days went by. On the 2nd evening, Yolanda knocked on our bedroom door. Raymond was asleep. I was sitting in the chair beside his bed reading. She came in and sat on the edge of the chair near the window, the way she used to do when she was a teenager and wanted to talk but didn't know how to start. For a while she said nothing. Then she said, "How long have you known about Darnell and the land project?" I said, "I only found the connection recently. But I had seen the shape of things for a while." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Mama, I am sorry." I looked at her. I did not say it is all right because it was not all right. But I also did not turn away from her. Said Yolanda, "Why?" She looked at the floor. She said, "Darnell said the house would solve everything. He said if we held the property we could leverage it, refinance against it, get back on our feet. He made it sound like it was still ours. Like it was still in the family. He said you and Daddy wouldn't even feel it. I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, and did you believe him? She did not answer right away. Then very quietly she said, I wanted to. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street. Raymond shifted in his sleep. I said, Yolanda, you are my daughter. That does not change. But this is my home and your father's home, and we are not signing it away to anyone. Not for any reason. She nodded. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She said, I know. I know that now. She stood up. She looked at Raymond sleeping. She looked at me. She said, what happens now? I said, that depends on Darnell. She nodded slowly. She left the room and closed the door behind her softly. I sat in the quiet for a long time after that. I looked at Raymond and I thought about all the years we had built inside these walls. All the years that now felt more solid and more real than they had in a long time. Yolanda spoke to Darnell that night. I do not know everything that was said, but I know it was long. I could hear the low sound of voices behind the closed door of their room. Not the rehearsed, managed kind of conversation they usually had. Real one. With pauses and unsteady edges. The next morning at breakfast, Darnell did not come down. Yolanda sat across from me and drank her coffee and said, he called his cousin. He is going to stay there for a while. Said, I see. She said, I told him what I should have said from the beginning. I said the house belongs to my parents and it always will. She looked into her mug. She said, I think I have been very stupid, Mama. I said, you have not been stupid. You have been afraid. She looked up at me. I said, that man made you feel like the ground was falling out from under you and he was the only one who knew how to stop it. That kind of fear makes people do things. She blinked. I said, but you are not falling. You never were. You have a mother and a father and a home and a family that has stood for 38 years and is not going anywhere. She put her coffee cup down. She put her face in her hands. And she cried. Not a polished, composed cry. A real one, the kind that comes from somewhere that has been sealed up for too long. I moved my chair around to her side of the table and I put my arm around her and I let her cry. We sat like that for a long time. It was the first time in 2 years that she had let me hold her the way a mother holds a daughter. Outside, the morning sun was coming through the kitchen window the way it always does on clear days, falling in a long, bright line across the floor. In the weeks that followed, the house settled back into a different kind of quiet. Not the tight, held-breath quiet it had been for 2 years. Real quiet. The kind that has room in it. Darnell hired an attorney and made 2 calls to Calvin Marsh's office, but Calvin is a careful man and there was nothing to contest. The deed to the East County land was registered, the property inventory was on file, and every document was exactly as it should be. Darnell's calls stopped after the second one. I heard from Yolanda that he went to stay with his cousin and then moved into a rental in the next county. She did not tell me much and I did not press. That was her business to manage. What I knew was that the lock had been changed back, that the dining room table was clear in the evenings, that the sound of one-sided phone calls about timelines and leveraging had gone silent. Raymond got a little stronger through that month. The warmer weather helped him. He started sitting on the front porch in the afternoons and some days. I would bring 2 cups of tea and sit with him and we would watch the neighborhood and not have to say anything at all. Those afternoons were some of the sweetest hours I can remember. Calvin Marsh came to the house twice during that time. Once to have Raymond sign some documents, once just to visit. He and Raymond had known each other 40 years. He sat on the porch and the 2 of them talked about things that had nothing to do with property or deeds. They talked about a fishing trip they took in 1987. About people they used to know. I brought cookies and left them to it and stood in the kitchen listening to the sound of 2 old men laughing and I thought this is what a house is for. One afternoon I went out to the backyard. I walked to the oak tree. The ground had settled back to normal. You would never know anything had been disturbed. I stood there for a while under those big steady branches and I thought about Raymond's father, who I only knew for a few years before he passed, who sat in our front room. and ate pound cake and said very little and carried something quietly for 50 years so that one day this family would have something nobody could take. I thought about what it means to love people you will not see the outcome for. To make a sacrifice for a day you know you will not be here to witness. I sat down on the grass under the oak tree and I stayed there until the light changed. Something was done in me. Not broken. Done the way a piece of work is done. The way a long column of numbers is finally balanced. Yolanda began coming down to sit with me in the evenings. Slowly at first. Then more regularly. We did not talk about Darnell very much. We talked about other things. About Raymond. About the way the garden had gone a little wild and what we might plant in the spring. About her job and the class she was thinking of taking. About small things and real things. The distance that had grown up between us over those 2 years did not disappear overnight. But it began slowly and honestly to close. One evening she helped me sort through a box of old photographs I had meant to organize for years. We sat at the kitchen table and went through them one by one. There was a photograph of her as a baby in Raymond's arms on the front porch. There was one of the house when it was first finished, all those years ago, Raymond and me standing in front of it with our arms around each other, squinting in the sun. The oak trees were small then. You could see the whole yard. I held that picture for a long time. Yolanda looked at it over my shoulder. She said, "You really built all of this." I said, "Your father and I." Together. She was quiet. Then she said, "I am glad you did not give it up, Mama." I set the picture down. I said it was never something I was going to give up. Not for any reason. She nodded. She picked up another photograph. We kept going through the box. It got dark outside while we were sitting there. I got up at some point and turned on the kitchen light and made 2 cups of tea and we kept going and the house was warm and quiet around us. And I thought this is what I fought for. Not the walls. Not the deed. Not the number Mr. Marsh told me the land was worth. I fought for this. For the right to sit in my own kitchen with my daughter and a box of photographs and a cup of tea and nowhere to be and nothing to fear. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Raymond passed in the early spring. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the light comes in soft and the birds are loud outside. He was in his bed. I was beside him. He did not struggle. He simply went the way a man goes when he has done everything he was supposed to do and it is finally time to rest. I held his hand. Talked to him. I do not know how much he heard at the end, but I believe he heard enough. I told him about the oak tree and about his father's letter. I told him he had been a good man and a good husband and a good keeper of the things that mattered. Then I sat beside him in the quiet and I let him go. We buried him on a Thursday. Yolanda stood beside me. Some old friends came. Calvin Marsh came. A few people from the neighborhood who had known Raymond for years. The service was simple. Raymond would not have wanted anything else. He was a man who did not need to be loud about the things he loved. Afterward, people came back to the house. They sat on the porch and in the living room and they ate and they remembered and I moved through it all in that particular quiet that lives inside a person in the first days after. Something enormous. A week after the service, Yolanda moved her remaining things out of the upstairs room and back into the smaller room across the hall. She said she wanted me to have the bigger room now. I said she did not need to do that. She said, "Mama, please. Let me do something right." So I let her. I moved into the larger room with the balcony that looks out over the garden. I put Raymond's photograph on the dresser. I put the small tin box from the backyard on the shelf where I could see it. I slept better in that room than I had in years. Some mornings I would open the balcony door and stand there with my coffee and look out at the oak tree and the garden and the sky over the fence. Those mornings I felt Raymond very close. Not in a sad way. In a settled way. The way you feel the presence of something that did not disappear but only moved to a different part of the room. Spring came. Yolanda and I planted the garden. It had been neglected and the raised beds needed clearing and new soil and it was a lot of work. We worked on it over several weekends. We got dirty and tired and disagreed twice about where to put the tomatoes. It was the best thing we did together in years. One morning near the end of spring I was in the kitchen early and Yolanda came downstairs and sat at the table and said, "Mama, I filed the paperwork this week." I turned to look at her. She said, with an attorney. For the divorce. I set down the spoon I was holding. I said, are you all right? She thought about that for a moment. She said, think I am. I actually think I am. I sat down across from her. I looked at my daughter in the morning light. She looked tired, but she also looked cleaner somehow. Like something that had been weighing on her face for a long time had finally been set down. I said, I am proud of you. She said, I do not know if I deserve that. Said, yes you do. She looked at the table. She said, I kept telling myself I was doing it for the family. For you and Daddy. That we needed stability. That was what Darnell kept saying. That everything we were doing was for the family. Said Yolanda. The family was always here. It was already stable. She looked up at me. I said, a home is not something you protect by taking it apart. She nodded. She looked like she was going to say something and then did not. Then she said, I know that now. We sat together until the coffee was done and then we made breakfast. Summer came and the tomatoes grew. I put a new cushion on the porch bench and I sat out there on warm evenings with a glass of sweet tea, and sometimes Yolanda sat with me and sometimes I sat alone, and both were fine. Calvin Marsh sorted out the rest of the estate over the summer. The East County land was placed in a family trust according to Raymond's wishes and Raymond's father's wishes before his. Yolanda is named in it. Any children she may have are named in it. It will stay in the family. That was the whole point. It was always the whole point. Raymond's father worked for that land with nothing but his 2 hands and his good name so that someday the family would have something nobody could touch. He was right. Nobody touched it. One afternoon near the end of summer I went down to the basement. We use it mostly for storage, old furniture and tools and boxes of things that have nowhere else to go. I had been thinking about it for a while. I moved some boxes. I found the corner where Raymond used to keep his woodworking tools before his knees got too bad for the stairs. The bench was still there, solid as the day he built it. I stood there for a moment, running my hand along the edge of it. I thought about Raymond the way he was at 50, strong and careful, making things with his hands. I thought about how a person can be present in a place long after they are gone, the way light stays in a room even after the lamp is turned off. I decided to clean out the basement. I took 3 days and I did it properly, sorting and clearing and hauling things out. I swept the floor and put up new shelves along the far wall. I brought down and made into something that felt like the right ending for the basement. It had been a storage space, and then for a while it had been the place where the tin box was kept and the memory of a long secret. Now it was becoming something new. That seemed right. Something new out of something old. That is what this family has always done. Few months have passed now. The oak leaves are turning. The garden is mostly done for the season, though I left the marigolds because they hold their color late and I like looking at them from the kitchen window. The house is quiet in the way I remember being quiet when it was just Raymond and me here years ago before everything got complicated. Yolanda is still here. I do not think she will stay forever, and that is all right. She has her own life to build. But she is here now and she is present, and when we sit together in the evenings I can feel that she is really there and not somewhere else in her head planning and calculating and managing. She is just here. That is enough. More than enough. I think about Raymond's father most mornings. Think about what he understood that most people do not. That the most important things you do for your family are the things they will not know you did until they need them. Quiet work. The patient holding. The letter in the tin box under the oak tree, written for a day he would not be alive to see. That is love without an audience. That is love that does not need to be seen to be real. I try to live that way. I do not always succeed. But I try. And some mornings, standing on the balcony with my coffee, looking at the garden, and the oak tree and the long quiet street beyond the gate, I feel something that I can only call peace. Not the peace of nothing happening. The peace of having come through something and knowing you came through it with yourself intact. With your home. With your daughter. With the knowledge that the people who loved you before you were born loved you well enough to give you something that would last. That is where I stand this morning. In my house. On my balcony. In the light. That is enough. That is everything. Thank you for being here with me today, dear friends. Every single one of you who listens from wherever you are in this wide world. You are the reason these stories are told. If this story found you today, if it touched something in you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Auntie's Stories. Your support means the world. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. And tell me, did this story remind you of someone you know? A mother, a grandmother, a woman who held things together quietly when everything around her was pulling apart. I would love to hear your thoughts. There is something about this story that keeps coming back to me, the question of patience. How long is a person supposed to be patient? There is a kind of patience that is wisdom, and there is a kind that is simply fear dressed in a quiet outfit. Miriam waited, but she was not waiting out of weakness. She was waiting because she understood that the right moment matters and that moving too soon is its own kind of failure. When she moved completely. And she moved with documents, with truth, with a dead man's love for his family held in a tin box, under an oak tree. What do you think? Did Miriam do the right thing? Should she have acted sooner? Should she have confronted Darnell differently? Should she have been harder or softer with Yolanda? These are real questions, and I believe you have real answers. Leave them in the comments below. I read every single one. And to those of you who have been with Auntie's Stories for a long time, thank you. You are family. To those finding us today for the first time, welcome home. If this story moved you and you would like to support the channel, you can press the super thanks button below this video. Every contribution helps us keep bringing you stories like this one. Stories about real life. About love and loss. About the cost of staying and the courage of holding on. Your kindness makes all of this possible. Please share this video with someone who needs to hear a story about a woman who did not give up. Who knew the value of what she had. Who waited until the time was right and then stood completely still and let the truth speak for itself. Someone who loved deeply. And was also brave. Those two things are not opposites. They never were. On your screen right now you can see 2 more stories from Auntie's Stories that I think you will love. Please watch them. There is so much more waiting for you on this channel. Subscribe so you never miss a new story. And until next time, take care of yourself. Take care of the people you love. And remember that a house is only as strong as the love that built it. With love and respect.